It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker for the day, a man I am very lucky enough to work closely with on many occasions, Mr. Ben Knight. Ben, can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly. Can you hear me, Charlotte?
I can hear you. Right. So,
Fantastic.
for the purpose of our audience, Ben Knight is the Head of Pedagogy and Research at Oxford University Press. Very smart job title. He's responsible for ensuring a clear research-informed pedagogical approach that underpins all of our Oxford ELT courses and our learning materials. His current priority is working on a pedagogical-based approach to using emerging technology in order to help teachers and learners in their language learning. He studied linguistics at the University of York and applied linguistics at the University of Edinburgh. He's been a teacher, a trainer, a lecturer in schools, universities, and for the British Council in various countries all around the world, in Asia, Africa, and Europe, but we are incredibly grateful that he now stays with us in our UP. So, Ben, I will hand this over to you. Enjoy your session. Take care. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. So wonderful. Thank you for your kind words. And so wonderful to see all the messages coming up. People speaking from Bolivia to Indonesia to Nigeria. Such a wide range of countries represented, and Ukraine, lots of them, and now I'm going to see lots of France, fantastic, Russia, Romania, everywhere. It's such a wonderful experience to talk to so many teachers from every corner of the world. Croatia, Pakistan, I can see the countries going past, Brazil. And wasn't it great to listen to Jonathan from Brazil, who is a fantastic advocate for teachers and for getting Oxford to make sure we are helping teachers. So my job title is Head of Pedagogy Research, and that makes it sound like I'm doing research, but I don't do research. My job is actually to be a bridge between people who do research and people who do teaching. And those sometimes feel like those are very different worlds. People who are studying in a university, research, looking at data, etc., and the people who are in a classroom dealing with children or with learners face to face, they feel like different worlds. And so trying to join those together is not easy. And that's what I do, try to join together what we learn from the people who are doing research to what we actually do when we teach or when we design courses at Oxford. And that's really what I want to share with you today, is some of the work we're doing here to help teachers get a better overview and understanding of what all this research is telling us about how we learn and therefore how we can help our students to learn. Okay. Now, in some ways, the problem is not that we're isolated from research and from information. The problem is that we get too much information, too many ideas, too many opinions about things, and sometimes it's really difficult. It can be overwhelming to us. How do we make sense of what we hear? So I've started to just put a few phrases here, some opinions which I was reading recently on LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, I don't know if you are part of LinkedIn, but you can, you see discussions going on, you hear different opinions. So exams prevent me from teaching my students in the way they really need. I don't let my students use their own language at all in my classroom. I try to use AI tools as much as possible. These are all different opinions that we're hearing. I shouldn't be giving tests to primary school children. Non-native speakers can be better than native speakers. So as I'm saying this, I'm trying to think, I want you to think, yeah, I hear these opinions too. Don't try to correct all errors. I'm sure when you're in a classroom, in a staff room, teacher's room, you're hearing lots of opinions as well about what works, what doesn't. Stick to your own accent or pronunciation. Schools must treat AI as a teammate, not a tool, not a threat. AI undermines cognitive development, etc., etc. Should we adapt our teaching to student learning styles? So these are all very different opinions about different aspects of teaching and learning. So how do we make sense of all of this? I think it's also the case that we hear a lot more now because of technology and new apps and solutions. And often those companies that are promoting their apps and their solutions are telling us, look, this will help you as a teacher. It'll help your learners. And so they tell us there are lots of clever things it can do and that will help them. But how do we know if they do actually help our learners? So I've just picked out some of the things I've heard recently from companies that are selling apps, automatic grading, or it plans your lessons, it creates an instant poll, generates personalized student reports, creates instant PowerPoint presentations. How fantastic. Define vocabulary, create an avatar, or it has an email responder, a jingle generator. That sounds fun. Mental wellness check-in, gives you daily discussion ideas. It creates comprehension tasks. Students can earn in-game cash, or it adapts materials for dyslexic students, or it offers premium images and themes. So all these different things that companies are saying, here is something that you can get from us. So how do we as teachers try and work out, yeah, that is something that's important for learning, or it isn't? That's kind of the question that we're looking at. How can we evaluate whether things help teaching and learning? And in a way, what we're trying to do is to create a single overview of what really matters in language learning. And we want that to link to what the research is telling us. And when we've been looking at this, we've been thinking of 4 things as we create a framework to help teachers. First of all, we're looking at principles which are evidence supported. Is there evidence to support them? And I'm going to explain that because it's not a simple black and white thing. Also, is there consensus? Because the research and the evidence is never 100%, there are always different opinions. And there are some areas where there's a lot of debate and disagreement, but there are some where there is a consensus. Most of the experts agree on something. So we're looking for consensus among the experts. We're looking for clarity. Can we define what it is? And lastly, we're thinking, is this something which has a practical application for teachers? So we're looking to find the principles of learning which meet these criteria. Now, let me just come to evidence-based approach, because I think this is really important. The evidence-based approach to pedagogy. Let me get the word pedagogy out of the way, because some people are more familiar with it than others. It's the way that we teach. It's kind of the methods, the techniques that we use to teach. It's how we teach, in contrast to the curriculum, which is what we teach. So pedagogy is how we teach. And I think the first G is usually hard and the second G is soft, so pedagogy. And those, because you're such great English language teachers, you will know why the first one is hard and the second one is soft. It's to do with where the vowel is, the front of the mouth or the back of the mouth. But I won't go into a pronunciation lesson. So what is an evidence-based? What is the kind of evidence we're looking for? Well, when people are doing research, they are collecting data in a controlled way, and that evidence, their findings may be different to our own experience as teachers. And sometimes that's a difficult thing to work out. Do we believe the evidence from a researcher, or do we trust our own experience more? I think this is something that we have to think about, and I want you to think about now. I'm asking, so here's a question. If you can put your answers in the chat, that would be great. I've got 2 questions. How often do you learn something from talks or from articles that is new or surprising to you? Is that something rare, or is it often? Can you just put in the chat, just tell me about how often you feel that you've learned something from other people's work that is surprising to you in relation to English language teaching. So we've got quite often, yeah, always, sometimes, yeah, so quite a lot. So actually, it sounds like you're pretty open to new ideas, which is great, and that's probably why you've come to LTOC, is because you are open to new ideas. Now, what about this second question? Is research more important than your own experience as a teacher? Now, the chat, the answers go back really fast. So I'm trying to catch. So it's lifelong learning. So that's, it's a good point that we all always feel that we're learning. I think if you're teaching in a classroom, you're just learning from your experience of trying to make things work in the classroom. So in that sense, we're always learning. But I'm thinking more about where someone else has done research and they've written about it and you've learned something from it. Yeah, there's kind of a mixture of answers there. Research is not that important. I mean, I'll give you an example of where research had an impact on my thinking. I remember seeing some research where they gave students a task to do, a writing task, and then they divided the students into 3 groups. One group got just a grade. The other students didn't get a grade, but they got feedback on how to improve. And then the third group of students got both the grade and feedback on how to improve. Then 4 weeks later, they gave the same task to the students, a similar task. And it's interesting to see what the results were. The students who only got a grade and no feedback didn't improve much when they did a similar task 4 weeks later. The students who got feedback on how to improve but no grade did better, generally, on average, did better the second time round because they'd learned from that feedback. So that wasn't surprising, that was quite expected. But the bit that was surprising was that the students who got both a grade and feedback on how to improve, they were almost the same as the students who just got a grade. They hardly improved at all. So the lesson from that was, if you give a grade plus feedback, the students don't read the feedback. The feedback only works, they only really take it in and learn from it if you don't give a grade. And that research changed my understanding of how students respond to grades and feedback. So I think there are times when we read something, we discover something which is completely new and is different to our own experience. We wouldn't have learned it from our own experience. Okay, so lots of interesting comments in there. Let me move on. So can research change our approach to teaching? So I was going to look at a few examples at how this can happen, or where it has happened. These first 4 ones are examples of areas of English language teaching where in the last 10, 20 years, the research has changed the beliefs of many teachers about these areas. So the research has had an impact on our teaching. So for example, learning styles, which as a teacher, when you hear about learning styles, you think, yeah, that feels right. I understand that. But in fact, the research has shown that although students have learning preferences, those learning preferences don't help them learn better. So if a student says they're a visual learner, okay, that's fine, but it's not going to help them learn faster or better if you as a teacher are adjusting to that. So there's a kind of understanding that the learning styles theory was actually not correct. So the research has changed our opinion of that. You need to start young to become proficient. So this is the idea that if you don't start very young, you won't become an expert speaker in a language. And of course, starting young has advantages, but it's not necessary. You can, people used to say, you have to start before you're 12. Well, that's not actually necessary. People can become proficient later. Students shouldn't be allowed to make mistakes. There used to be a belief that if you let students make mistakes, those will fossilize. But now through research, and I'm giving examples of some people who have written about the research, and I'll give you the full references at the end. But really my point is to show that we have changed the way that we teach because of research. The last point there, the fourth point, you need to remove your L1 accent to be good at English. So that used to be a common belief. I think now we've learned that that's not the case, that you can have your Italian accent or your Indian accent or your Brazilian accent and be really good at English. So those are four which are kind of quite commonly accepted now. Here are another four which are probably still at an earlier stage. Not everybody accepts these, but it's starting to change our views. So for example, the use of L1, your mother tongue, in the classroom. There used to be a view that that was not a good thing to do. I think nowadays we understand that there are times when it's really useful for your students to use the first language in the classroom. Presenting vocabulary in semantic sets. This is a bit difficult to explain this, but if we teach vocabulary simply as, for example, a list of fruit and vegetables as a semantic set, that actually doesn't help our students as much as if we mix them up. Because if the words are interchangeable, so there's a word like apple and orange and mango are all interchangeable, then the students get mixed up. And there's research to show this. EMI, English as a medium of instruction, as where we teach science through English. Well, there are many good things about it, but it's not the case. Well, research is showing that in many cases, it doesn't actually make you learn faster. It may be a good thing for other reasons, but it doesn't help you learn faster. And discovery learning and direct instruction, there's a lot of debate around this because of perhaps in other subjects more than in English. But the idea of letting your students discover things in contrast to whether you just teach it directly. And I love discovery learning. I can see the beauty of it, but the research in fact shows that in many situations, direct instruction is more efficient, is more effective for learning certain types of things. So these are all interesting areas where research is having an impact on what we actually do, our practice. I can see in the corner of my eye lots of wonderful comments coming in, and sometimes they're moving so quickly it's difficult for me to read them. But there's, there's some reference to action research, which I think I'm going to mention later. Am I? Yes, I am. So one of the things when we talk about evidence and research for the way we teach is that we have to understand that the evidence is always incomplete. We have some pieces of the overall jigsaw puzzle, but we don't have the whole picture. And so what researchers are doing is trying to make sense of those pieces. They're trying to work out what the overall picture is, but we can't be certain of it. And sometimes we get new evidence which makes us change our opinion of what the picture is. So it's not like science, many areas of science, of physics or biology, where we can say there's such strong, clear, complete evidence that particular rules are true for everybody. When it comes to teaching and learning, it's incomplete and it varies very much according to context. And context is one of the things that really has a huge impact because it's a human activity and we interact with that context all the time. So a lot of the principles of good language learning are affected by factors like age. Are we talking about young children? Are we talking about adults? Educational background. Are these people who have already studied a lot, who have got really good study skills, or are the students may not even be literate in their own language? What's the educational culture? Are your students in a culture where the teacher is always right and your job is to listen to the teacher? Or are you part of a culture where classroom is more learner-centered and more kind of democratic atmosphere in the classroom? What's the target language outside the classroom? Are you living in a country where English is spoken outside the classroom or not? What are the exams? Do the exams affect your teaching? Does the exam have a speaking test or not? The technology. Do you have access to the internet, for example, in your classroom? How much are your parents, the parents of your students, involved in learning? And what are the interests of students? So all of these different factors in the context can make the principles of how we teach different. So what works in one context may not work in another context. And I know you know that, but it's just worth reminding ourselves that when we talk about research and evidence, it is very dependent on the context. And it's one of the reasons that somebody mentioned action research. And I think this is action research is when you as a teacher take some issue, some theory or idea, and you test it out in your own context, because maybe that finding related to a very different context, and maybe it applies to yours, or maybe it partly applies. And so that trying it out in your own teaching context and seeing what works, what doesn't work, perhaps trying with a colleague slightly different approaches and comparing your success. That's the kind of action research which is really important for teaching, much more than many other areas. Okay, so again, I'm tempted just to stop talking and just to read all your comments, because there's lots of interesting ones. I hope as you're listening to me, you're also reading the comments, because there's lots of really interesting things. So that's the kind of problem. We might find the world a bit confusing because there are so many opinions, so many ideas of what's effective. Research is there, but it's not complete, and it's kind of mixed. So what we're trying to do in Oxford is, can we create a framework of the things that we are more confident about? So to help people get an overall picture of what really helps. And so that's what we're setting out to do. And as we do this, we have to think a little bit about what learning is, and to what extent is it that we're learning through our brains, or we're learning through our hearts. And in fact, of course, it's both to some extent, because our brains is where learning happens. When we say learning, we mean knowledge and skills that have moved from our short-term memory, our working memory, into our long-term memory, and that knowledge is strong enough and retrievable, that we can retrieve it quickly enough to use when we need to use it. So the learning is something that's happening in our brains. And that self-regulation is the way that we manage our learning process. So all of that is cognition, it's brain focused. But what makes us engage in order to learn? Because learning a language, for example, takes a long time, takes years, many hours of application. And so we need to we need to engage our brains in order to learn. And that's where the emotional side comes into it, our motivation, our persistence, our mindset, our attitude to risk and to openness to trying something new, and even our sense of identity of who we are and who we which groups we want to belong to. All of those affect our willingness to engage with a cognitive activity. So learning is cognitive, but the emotional side is what makes it happen. And so when we're talking about effective learning, we're trying to balance both those sides of learning. So here we've just started with a kind of 10 high-level principles of learning, of good learning, what helps learning, especially language learning. So the first, I'm going to go into what they mean in a second. So let me just take you through quickly just to give you an overview. So first of all, create an environment that maximizes learning. Then build on the learner's reasons for learning the language. Strengthen the learner's belief in the ability to succeed. Focus on a learning goal. Manage cognitive load. Get learners to build actively on what they know. Motivate learners to engage with and complete learning tasks. Strengthen the transfer from short-term memory to long-term memory. Build automaticity in using the language, and reduce the learner's anxiety in using the language. So those at a top level is those 10 areas we're trying to manage as teachers in order to get our students to learn as well as they can. Let me just spend a little bit of time looking at those. So here on the left, I've got the first 5 principles. And on the right, I've got just a little bit of an explanation, a little bit of a gloss on what each one is. But unfortunately, they've got mixed up. So what I would like you to do is just to work out which description on the right matches the principle on the left. So for example, if you think create an environment that maximizes learning is E, linking activities in the course with their actual reasons for learning English, you would put 1E. Now someone's put 1C, which is the correct answer, creating a positive learning space where conditions and relationships support and motivate learners. So yeah, 1C, you got that one, or C1. Now can you have a look at the others? 2, 3, 4, and 5. Yeah, most of you have spotted that 2 is E. So it's linking activities in the course with their actual reasons for learning. And those reasons might be an exam. It might be that they want to work in the language. It might be they travel. It might be just, they want it for online gaming or something like that. Okay, so then 3, strengthen the learner's belief in the ability to succeed. Yeah, there we got D. So having a positive learning mindset, because you must know from your own experience that if you believe you can do something, you can learn something, then you're more motivated to do it. If you think that you can't do it, then you lose motivation. And then focus on the learning goal, which is A, 4A, and 5, cognitive load. This is about not overwhelming the short-term memory. Cognitive load is where you can't process something because you've got too much information at the same time. Okay, so I think you've got all those. And then the second set, oh, there we are. I've got the answers. And if you got that right, then you get a little prize, I think. I have to ask Charlotte for that afterwards. Okay, then the second set of principles. And again, they're all mixed up. So can you sort out which ones? Let me give you a few seconds to read through those. Naomi's been very organized. Some of it's right, Helena. Some of you have been very organized and got all the answers in a single response, which is great. So 6, get learners to build actively on what they know. So the way that we learn is we attach new information to old information. And that's I. So building knowledge by connecting it to what they already know. Then 7, motivate learners to engage with and complete learning tasks. So a student might be motivated to learn English, but when they're doing actual activities, they don't really engage with it. And that's about designing activities to be engaging. So that's F, 7F, designing learning activities that capture and sustain their interest. Then 8, strengthen transfer into long-term memory. So that is J, reinforcing initial knowledge, so it becomes part of their long-term memory. And then 9, automaticity in using language, because language is different to other areas, other skills and knowledge, because it has to be usable in real time. We have to be able to answer immediately and to engage in speaking. It requires that automatic knowledge. And that, of course, is G. And then 10, reducing learners' anxiety is H, lowering emotional barriers to encourage participation and risk-taking. So I think you've got all those, and I think the next slide is going to give you the answers anyway. Yes, there you go. Hopefully you've got all those. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, if you put in a wrong answer, I wouldn't have noticed because it is going past too quickly, but I think most of you got that. Okay, so there we were talking about broad principles, but they don't really tell you exactly what you have to do in the classroom. So now we want to just look at what does that mean in practice when you're in the classroom? How can you think about those principles in terms of what you actually do in the classroom? So what we can do is take each principle and then look at the practices for the classroom. So in this case, let's start with the first principle, create an environment that maximizes learning. So what can we actually do in the classroom as teachers? Well, the first area is fostering a confidence and sense of belonging to build rapport. So when we're in the, and I'm sure a lot of you do this already, you're trying to build that sense of confidence and that sense of people belonging to a class so that they are open to learning. They feel that confidence. And you may do that in lots of different ways. You might do that just by the way that you ask them about what they did at the weekend, their interests, you know something about them, you encourage them to work together and to build to build knowledge of each other and to feel relaxed in the classroom. So you don't shout at your students and you try and make them feel, you encourage them, so they build, so it's that encouraging atmosphere. Second thing is you're creating a community of learning. And this is where you're thinking not just about students, but also the parents. How do you bring the parents in and other people in the community? Maybe it's other teachers in a university, lecturers in a university. How do you think about that whole community of learning? So the students are not just learning in the classroom, but they're looking for opportunities to learn and they're being supported in their learning outside. That creating positive group dynamics, I think we all know, we probably remember from our childhood that working in groups in classrooms, is not always a happy experience. It's an opportunity for some people to try to dominate, to create unpleasant dynamics in the classroom. So as a teacher, what we're trying to do is to arrange those group activities so that it creates a positive group dynamic. So that's one of the things we're trying to do. And the fourth one there is recognizing and responding to special needs. We know that not all our students are the same. Some of them have got some special needs, and that we're trying to identify those and respond to those. So all of these things are part of creating an environment that maximizes learning. This is principle 6, get learners to build actively on what they know. So as I was saying earlier, that learning isn't just like photocopying onto a blank sheet. It's actually attaching new information onto what we already know. So you have to be thinking about what your students already know in order for them to learn the next thing. And so there are a number of things that we can do as teachers. We need to be evaluating and activating and building on existing knowledge and skills. So if we're starting to teach something, we want to first of all check, well, what do they already know? And we want to activate what they already know. We want to get it to the top of their mind so that we can add things to it. Secondly, we need to actively engage with new knowledge and skills. So as we build those new skills, it needs to be an active engagement, not just listening, but actually taking it and doing something with it. And then providing timely and actionable feedback, because when our students do something and we give feedback on it, that is building on what they already know. They think they know something, they maybe get it wrong, you give them feedback and that builds on it. So that feedback, especially if it's timely and actionable, then it really helps building the knowledge. And then fourthly, working collaboratively in learning activities, because when you work collaboratively in a group, you are learning things from other people which build on what you already know. There's always that sense that somebody knows something which you don't know. And if you can get people working positively in groups, they're not learning just from you, but they're learning from each other. Okay, and here's another example. This is 8, strengthen transfer into long-term memory. So how do we so that's when we hear something for the first time, it's just in our working memory. But what we want is that to go into our long-term memory so that we can recall it later, we can use it later. One of the key things there is to recycle target language. And I don't know if you're familiar with spaced repetition, but this is where we repeat things that students learned earlier. Maybe it may be 4 weeks later, 3 weeks later, so that just as they're forgetting it, it gets recycled and that helps strengthen it. We engage multiple processing systems at the same time. So that means if we are learning something through the words, if we also learn it through reading it, we also hear it or we see it, all those multiple ways of processing that information makes it more reinforced. So when we're learning words, it's really good to not only see them, but also hear them. It helps that long-term memory. And then providing extensive reading opportunities and learning opportunities, because this is why we want our students to read books, novels, longer texts, or to listen to stories, audio stories or video, films, all of this, because what they're getting there is a repetition, a recycling of language, which really helps their long-term memory. Okay, so we've gone from principles and then to some practices, but even then we have to think, well, what does that actually mean in a real context? Can we get into more detail so that you know really what to do? So we talked about principles. For example, get learners to build actively on what they know. And then we talked about some practices. For example, evaluate, activate, and build on existing knowledge and skills. Now then let's think of actually what you might do. So you might, for example, use a pre-assessment activity. So at the beginning of a class, perhaps you're going to do a lesson on different ways of cooking, different terms for cooking, for fry and bake and saute, etc. And so you start off with a quick quiz, or you get them to create a mind map, and you're just trying to get a sense of, well, what do they already know? There's no point spending a lot of time teaching things which they already know. You're looking to extend what they know. And there's lots of things. So if in this area, I just mentioned pre-assessment activities, quizzes, or you might start a lesson with a discussion prompt that connects the learner's experience or previous learning. So perhaps you're going to talk about stories, because you want to talk about past simple versus past continuous, and stories are a good way of doing that. So you ask students to talk about something that happened to them. That gives you an opportunity. You encourage brainstorming or discussion in the home language before engaging in tasks in the target language. So that depends on the context, if that is something that might be useful. Using prediction tasks before they read or listen to activate prior knowledge. Encourage students to recall related vocabulary before introducing new words, and encouraging learners to compare new concepts with their first language or previously learned structures. So if you're looking at, for example, modal verbs, have to, don't have to, must, mustn't, it's a tricky one. But I think it's really useful sometimes for students to think, well, how is that different to those modal verbs in their own language? That helps them to understand. It builds on what they already know. Okay, and then how do we link all these principles to actual research, which is what we want to be able to do? So what we're doing in the framework is we're explaining this principle and what it means, but we're also, if you see at the bottom, it says key concepts, and saying these are based on the research around constructivism, cognitive load theory, translanguaging. And then for each of those key concepts, we provide an explanation and a reference to important articles or chapters. So for example, in that one before, you saw constructivism. And if you are familiar with this, it's learning is a process which connects new knowledge to existing knowledge. Each learner creates their knowledge through experimentation. So that's what constructivism is. And that's an important concept behind the principles. And if you want to find out more about it, if you want to read the research about it, we're providing a number of articles where you can find out more about it. Let's look at another area. Build on the learners' reasons for learning the language. So this is around motivation. And if we want to build on their reasons for learning language, there are some things we can do, some practices. So first of all, we want our students to feel positive about the language. Now, if I was learning French, that would probably mean I would want to feel positive. The teacher would want me to feel positive about France and learning French because French is associated with France. In the case of English, it's a bit different because English is a global language. A lot of people are learning English, not because of any interest with the UK or the US or Australia, but because for other reasons. So in this case, it might be feel positive about the language as an international language, their interest in the world around them. So these are all reasons to want to learn the language. The second thing is linking tasks to learners' goals. So as I said, if their real reason for learning is to be able to talk in English at work because there are work opportunities where they use English, then you need to link the things they're doing to what they actually want to be able to use it. Or it might be an exam, which is often the motivation for many students in the schools. And then also you're looking for opportunities to bring real world language into the classroom, so it doesn't feel like it's just a subject in a school, but it is a real language. Okay, so here I've got some applications and they're not completed. So I'm just going to see, I'm going to give you the completion, but just give you a few seconds to read through these and see if you can think what you would put to complete these. So if their goal is to advance their career, then you can set up good role plays with A, or you can ask them to give a presentation on B. If their goal is to study abroad, they want to go to university abroad, prepare for or listen to recordings of. If their goal is to pass an exam, you might set timed practice activities to build or teach exam strategies for tackling different. Okay, so let me go on to the next slide, here's some suggestions. So you might set up roles with customer interactions, ask them to give a presentation on a case study, prepare for admissions interviews. But if they're going to study abroad, listen to recordings of students' experiences overseas. That would be interesting. If their goal is to pass an exam, well, you're setting timed practice activities to build exam pacing and confidence, and teach exam strategies for tackling different question types. So these are all different things which relate to the idea of linking tasks to learners' goals. There's another one here: connect language learning in the class to real-world needs. So again, we can see here the key concepts are learner-centeredness, learner agency, intrinsic motivation. And learner-centeredness, which is giving particular attention to needs and participation of learners within a class. So you're thinking about the learner's needs, not just the curriculum. And then there's a lot of research being done in this area, and it's useful to, if you're interested, to find out more about the research, then there are references here. Okay, so all of that was describing the framework which we are developing and which we will share to you. I can't share it with you completely today, but we will be sharing it to you, a website address in the future. Now, how can you use these principles of language learning? How can you use this framework? Well, I think there are two main ways to do this. First one is you can use it to manage your own or your team's professional development. And then the second way is to evaluate resources from other organizations, maybe course books or apps. Are they really helping language learning? So let me give some examples. So professional development. What you might do is you might look at the framework with the principles, read through them in a particular area, and then identify one area which you think is really interesting. So you might say, for example, the thing that I'm interested in is how do I activate students' prior knowledge about something. So I know I'm going to teach something new, but I want to activate the knowledge they already have. How can I do that? So you've identified something to focus on, and then you experiment. So this is your action research. You experiment to see what happens if I do this. What if I take one of those ideas and try it out? What works? What doesn't work? And then you can then reflect on that. And that's part of your professional development. That's learning through doing, but it's motivated by reading the ideas in the principles framework. So, for example, you might say, how might I get my students to speak more in class? That might be the problem that you're trying to deal with. You look in the framework and it talks about reducing learners' anxiety in using language, creating positive group dynamics, feeling positive about the language, provide scaffolding and manage task complexity, teach predictable clusters and exchanges. Yeah, that's interesting. Let me see what I can do to teach predictable clusters and exchanges. So maybe that's the approach. Maybe that will help my students speak more in class. So you try something out in your class, you work out some clusters, some exchanges to get your students speaking more comfortably, and you see if it works. Well, some things work or some things don't. So that's kind of a way of using this to improve your professional development. Or it might be evaluating learning materials or AI-based educational tools. So, for example, you might be looking at an app which says it provides detailed, personalized feedback to students. That sounds great. But how do you know if it's really any good? Well, if you look in the framework, it says a number of things which are important for good feedback. It needs to be timely and actionable feedback. You need to get the timing right and the follow-up right. So you need to look at the app and see, is it doing that? Second point is it needs to identify the priorities for the learning. So you don't want an app that's just going to point out every error or weakness, because that will overwhelm the students, the learners. Or develop the learner's ability to self-correct. So you don't want the app to just correct it. You want the app to help the student to correct themselves. And fourthly, you want the feedback to build the student's belief to succeed by giving opportunities to repeat and improve performance. So they do a task, they get feedback, and they have an opportunity to try again and do better. And that builds their belief. So the ideal feedback system would have all 4 characteristics. Now, the app you're looking at might do that, or it might do 3 of them, and you might feel that's still useful. But this gives you a way to think, what is it that we really want that will help our students to learn? Okay, so I'm going to wrap up now. Getting close to the end. I'm trying to stop early so that I can get your questions and answer your questions. I want to have plenty of time for that. So at this stage, I'm just going to do a quick summary. We have these 10 principles, and you are very clever people, so you will remember those. If I then do this, and I have taken out words, but because you're such brilliant students listening to this, you can fill in those words. So can you try to remember what is the missing word in each box? So you thought you were going to learn, but you're being tested. So I don't want you to go. Please don't go. 1, environment. Yes. 2, build on the learner's reasons. Yep. Strengthen the learner's belief in their ability to learn, to succeed, I think. Focus on the learning goals. Manage. That's a tough one. Number 5 is tough. Just trying to see if anybody's got number 5. Cognitive load. Number 6, get learners to build, actively on what they know. There's a little bit of a delay when you put in your responses. I think it's a 7-second delay before it comes to me. So if you think I'm missing your answers, 7, motivate learners to, I think I've seen engage, 8, strengthen transfer into long-term memory, build automaticity, or I think someone said fluency, which is also fine, fluency or automaticity. And 10, reduce learners' anxiety in using language. Okay, so we've got that there. So there we are. We've got our 10 principles at a top level. They're trying to tie together everything that we know about language learning into one view. I mentioned a number of different references and research in there. Those are the references if you need them. I've put my email address and I've put my LinkedIn a QR code to my LinkedIn address. So I put the LinkedIn address there because as we make more of this public and available to you, I'll share it on LinkedIn, also on OUP website. So if you want to follow me there, you'll kind of get up-to-date updates on that. Okay, great. So I've said what I want to say, but I really wanted to make sure I had time for questions and answers.
You do have a little time, Ben. If you have a look at the Q&A tab, our moderating team and our participants have been sticking their questions in.
Fantastic. That's so brilliant. Okay. Do you cover PRON at all, dealing with emergent language? Any tips? So I have a slight suspicion that relates to the previous talk with Richard and Danny.
Maybe scroll down to the bottom.
Right. Okay. No, well, I think that just that first one. Can we really trust AI responses and not fear misleadings and hallucinations, if not falsehood? No, that's absolutely true. We we can't trust AI responses. That's one thing that we've learned. I remember somebody said that using AI is like having a drunk intern, which is someone to help you, but someone not reliable at all. So they might be helpful, and I use AI every single day for my work, but we have to recognize that it's not reliable. Herman, for research, how do you collect the data? So that's a really good point, because in the research, generally, what people are looking for is what happens if you do one thing versus if you do a different thing. And so they will, it's an intervention, an action by the teacher. And so they will have some students who you're doing the action that you're interested in, and then you have a control group who don't have that. And you want to make sure the two groups are as similar as possible, so that you can, so the difference in their resulting learning is a result of the action that you have taken with one group compared to the control group. But in reality, all humans are so different, and every situation is so different. Every class is different, and the way that the actions are, the teacher's actions are done in one class versus another, is very difficult to control these 100%. So, but that is how they try to do it in classroom. But sometimes data, in order to control it even more, people will do research that are very controlled situations. So, for example, if you're learning new language, if they're looking at how people learn new words, because it's difficult to know whether somebody was already familiar with a word or not, they sometimes do experiments with people learning made up, invented words, just to see whether they can, how they learn it, their techniques for learning, what helps, what doesn't help. So of course, there are so many different types of collecting data, but usually it's what happens with one behavior and what happens with a control group where you don't have that behavior. Is the feedback, I mean, feedback is absolutely one of the most important things in learning. We learn by trying something and then getting feedback on it. As I mentioned, there are a number of different features to effective feedback. The timing of it, whether it tells you something specific, and whether it tells you how you can improve as a result. So that feedback is critical. And I mentioned an experiment with grades and feedback, and the research showed that if you give a grade, students tend not to read the feedback, which I think is really important. So if you can avoid giving grades as much as possible, that is more helpful for their learning, but you may be in a school or a context where that's difficult to do. But if you can, it's important. Would you suggest this approach to formative assessment or summative assessment, or both? Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about summative assessment, you definitely, you have to give grades. That's the important part of it. But formative assessment is about learning. And so in formative assessment, I would try to avoid giving grades as much as possible. Would you, in many classrooms, especially where resources are limited, it's not easy to apply evidence-based frameworks fully. What would you suggest as simple, realistic steps to? Yeah, I think that's a good question, El Habib, I think it is. So the principles are not a matter of resources in themselves, but I can see why you say that, because in order to, for example, create a more positive, encouraging environment, that is easier when you have one teacher and a smaller number of students. If you have a teacher with 50 students, it becomes more difficult, but it's not impossible. If you know that your objective is to make people feel positive about learning, you know your objective is to reduce their anxiety about learning and to reduce the risks, then there are ways that you can, for example, scaffold an activity, provide the steps and support so that students are likely to be successful in learning. And that's not a question of resource, that's your techniques as a teacher, thinking about the steps and making sure that students do not fail or are given a good chance to be successful in their learning.
Probably time for one more question, Ben.
Oh my gosh. What about neural? No. See, now you put pressure on me to choose a good question.
Sorry.
That's right. The importance of context, should we also include geographical? Yeah. Yes. Is it also for university students? What is actionable feedback? Summative. Okay, so those are lots of things. So actionable feedback, I'll just explain that point because I used it. Actionable feedback is where you say what someone needs to do to improve. So if I've spoken, if I've given a front of class presentation and I've had a problem with lots of hesitating, as I'm doing now, then the teacher might say, this is something that you could do to improve it. You could practice it from a script and practice with friends so that you can reduce your hesitation. Something like that. Okay. I'm going to stop.
Okay, I'll give you your notes then. I'll send you the feedback later, Ben. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, make it actionable. Don't put a grade.
Don't put a grade on it. Yeah. So what I've learned is make it actionable, but don't give it a grade. Yeah. I think it's really interesting though. I mean, not so much now. I think my students do accept the feedback, like actionable feedback I give, but so many students expect a grade, and but you're so right with what you're saying. But it's that hard balance of what they're used to and what is actually good for them. Yeah. But anyway. Thank you, Ben. Really, really interesting. I really look forward to seeing more as you can reveal more. And as Ben said, if you want to find out more, then perhaps make a note of his email address on the screen there, or do the QR code, which takes you to his LinkedIn, and then you'll be there to see more when he reveals it. As always, Ben, a real pleasure to listen to you. Your talks are always so informative. Thank you so very much for joining us